decides about the value of the land? I know I've asked you that before, but is it up to the market or?
Yeah, the assessing is more of a deduction process.
Mm-hmm.
So the assessor looks at similar transactions in the area
mm-hmm.
and estimates yours based, yours would be higher if you have advantages that the other places don't have. So any advantages and disadvantages you adjust against similar transactions. And usually in the United States, the county, in a regular government thing, the county does the assessing. And then as a property owner, you can appeal your assessment. And you can also appeal the assessment of other people's property. You can file an appeal if you have a stake in it. Like if you are a tenant and there's something in their lease that says if there's a tax increase, it goes into your lease, then you have standing to appeal. If you have, if my property is assessed higher than your property, I can appeal my property and use yours as an example. And they will probably lower mine, but they will also raise yours. So that you get a notification and you get to say why yours should be less than mine. So if the assessing is done well, there's very few appeals. And it's actually much less expensive to assess well and not have to pay for the appeals process. Because the government carries a lot of that cost. The person appealing has to hire his own appraisers to document his case, but the judge and all the court costs are borne by the government. So it's in the government's interest to assess so well that nobody wants to appeal. If it's assessed well and you appeal, you'll lose.
Well, the assessing must be kind of a complicated thing when you start doing it. Because in Sweden, normally you're taxed much more on the house than you are on the ground. And the house is kind of easy. If you have 2 bathrooms, if you have a fireplace, and blah, blah, blah. It's very certain things that raise the value of your property. And a little bit where it's situated, but very much the inside or
mm-hmm.
So to start assessing the land, take a long time, I think.
Well, the assessors say it's,
So, all right.
They already break it down
mm-hmm.
because it's hard to intelligently assess the total
mm-hmm.
without, if you have 2 buildings
mm-hmm.
and they're in different places but they're very similar, then the building values ought to be similar. And if you have 2 pieces of land and they have different buildings on them, but they're right next to each other, then the land values ought to be similar. Well, if all the houses are the same in a block, that's easy. But when you have unique houses together, and you have to find a house from somewhere else, you already have to assess the buildings and the land separately. And then it gets even more complicated because in one neighborhood, if that house burned down or something, the market use would be to build another one just like it. But in other neighborhood, if it's a distressed neighborhood and the house burned down, they would say, well, we would never build another new house here because there are vacant houses in this neighborhood. So why build a new one? And then at the other end, here's a neighborhood that's in such high demand that if a house burned down, they would say, well, we wouldn't build another house, we would build an apartment building. So those buildings are actually worth a little less because the market is for a better building over here, and there's not even enough of a market for another house over there. So there are some complications, but assessing the building is more complicated. in Sweden, the assessor might be allowed to come inside. I don't know. In the United States, we're very private property, no government, stay out. And so the assessor has to assess the building from the street. He's not allowed to go on your property to do the assessing. So he can look at the brick and the paint and the shingles and the windows, but he doesn't know if you have a marble fireplace. He doesn't know if your foundation is cracked. Well, if your foundation is cracked, it will get you a lower assessment. So you will bring the assessor in and show him your cracked foundation, but you won't show him your marble fireplace or the extra bathroom that you put in without filing permits. You can only do that if you know how to do your own plumbing. Any professional contractor always files a permit because he could lose his license if he does work without filing the permits that are required. So there's more complexity with the buildings, and the professional assessors say that it's cheaper to assess the land and it's usually more accurate. Now, they still assess the buildings. Even if they're only taxing the land, they still assess the buildings because of that thing that here's two buildings in different areas and one sold for more than the other. Most of that difference is a land value. But you have to assess the buildings to actually know whether these two buildings are similar. So they don't have to assess all the buildings, but they have to go out and assess the buildings that have sold, so that their comparables are good. So anyhow, this is the land trust that says you're welcome hither. This was the first and probably the most successful land value tax. It's owned by the Arden single tax community. So they collect the rent, and that's the only tax, is their philosophy. And most communities go downhill. Then when they're new, they try to attract the richest people they can. And then as the community gets older, poorer people move in. This community, this was the first building. Whoops. That's all of Arden. There's about 4,000 people. There's 3 Ardens. There's Arden, Ardentown, and Arden Crop. And there's about 4,000 people there, according to the census. But there are lots of trees, and the houses, you can't see most of the houses from the air because they're under a lot of trees. But that's the first building that was built in Arden. That was they built a library because they thought people will come here if there's a library. Public school, free public education started in the United States on the frontier, not in the cities. And the reason it started is people said, nope. Men came out and started to settle it, and they wanted women to come out and start families with them. And the women said, we will not go live out there where there's no place for our children to get an education. And there wasn't enough of a market for private schools. So they got together and they built a schoolhouse and sent for a school teacher from the east. And the schools, people say, why should property tax pay for schools? But the number one thing of a residential property, of a residential location, is the quality of schools. So when you look in the papers to buy a house, in the United States at least, there's a picture of the house, there's the price they're asking, the property tax every year, and the name of the school district. And that's all that's there. And if you want to know more, you can call them, you can go look at it or whatever. But the thing they tell everybody is the name of the school district. Because school districts, the quality of the school is the number one factor for residential property values. And we have people, why should property tax pay for my schools? And it's, well, because even if you don't have children in school, your property value is better. And if having a good school benefits you as a homeowner, the extra value you get for being in a good school district is much higher than the cost of the school district. So, again, it's something everybody should benefit. Transportation. If you can walk to a train or a bus, the property value is much higher than if you have to drive to the train and park your car or something. If you're close to a town where you can walk to the grocer, your property value is higher. If there's low crime, and it's all land value. It's the building's the building. So the location value is, if you have good government and it's successful, your land value is high. And if your government is not functioning well, or you have problems that they can't overcome, might not be your local government's fault if you have high crime. But your land value goes down because you're suffering with the crime. This is something that it's a matter of basic fairness. You should pay for the benefit you get. That's the philosophy. So that farmer we go way up to that rural area where he was up in the forest, he might not have good roads, he doesn't have access to a lot of stores. He has to drive somewhere once a week or every 2 weeks to get all his provisions for the coming week. He has to plan his life around that. So he should pay a very low tax. But the guy who's farming on the highway and he can walk across the street and do his shopping, he should pay a lot more. Anything else, or should I wrap up?
I can see the sense in that, but I can see the difficulties in valuing or deciding what things are that worth. To decide the value, I think that would be quite difficult.
The most difficult properties to assess for the county is industrial property. Because you want to get, you have a steel mill. Well, there's no other steel mill in the county. So you have to go to other counties to get data on steel mills. Well, then they're in entirely different locations. And even so, you don't have access for that data. You have to send for it. And you don't know how the other county does its assessing. So a lot of states they let the counties do the assessing for residential, and then they have a state office that gives them assistance with industrial and commercial. And anything that's very, very unique, they will have additional help for that. But yeah, the more unique it is, the more difficult it is to assess. So if we have in the United States, we have suburbs where one company comes in and they build 200 houses and they all look the same. It's very easy to assess those. But other places, people build their own houses and each one is different. And that ends up being very difficult to assess.
It's already done today by real estate agents. Real estate agents.
Well, the real estate agents avoid telling you what to sell it for. Because if they're wrong, they get into trouble. So they say, yeah, we think we can sell this, but you have to pick a price. And if you pick a price too high, it won't sell. And if you pick a price too low and it sells immediately, then you could have sold it for more. And the real estate agents are very shy about giving you advice because if they're wrong, it's their fault. They would rather that if you're wrong, it's your fault. And they will take you to the books and they'll say, here's some houses that sold and here's what they sold for. And you look at that, but you as a customer have to figure it out.
Yeah.
So
That's not the case as much in Sweden.
no?
No, you can ask a real estate agent to give you a price, and you can take out, if you want a price on your house, you'll ask 2 or 3,
Okay.
and the real estate agent will come out and they will give you what they think is the value, and it's usually within not very much difference.
Well, we have more lawyers with nothing to do.
Yeah, I think you have, yes. Lawyers are not involved in real estate in Sweden.
No?
No. You don't have a lawyer involved when you buy a house
Yeah.
in Sweden.
Well, we don't. We have the brokers. Residential housing does not usually involve a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
In the United States, commercial sales often involve a lawyer.
Yeah, probably. I don't know
And-
about that in Sweden.
But I'm talking about lawyers suing the real estate broker afterwards because
Okay,
the real
okay.
estate broker gave them bad advice.
Okay.
We-
mm-hmm.
We have lawyers always looking for something they can sue about.
Yeah. Well, that's the impression we get. Yeah.
Okay. So he's just giving me the 3-minute warning,
Oh, that's
and then we run out of video. But I think we're good.
okay.
So
Have you got the answer for?
Yeah,
What you're
I
saying?
understand it a little bit, but I still have these thoughts about how difficult it would be to value the land. That's my biggest concern, because I think it will, how to value a forest, because we have so much forest in Sweden, and it's used like, you take crops from it in the way that you take the wood.
who evaluates for property tax now? Is it done locally?
The property taxes, well, as a house owner in Sweden, you are sent paper where you're supposed to yourself tell what you have inside your house. And
Yeah.
So it's an honesty tax.
yes. Well, and you have to sign it that you are doing it honestly.
Uh-huh.
And if they find out that you are not doing it, you will get sued. You will have to pay. But I think my general feeling is that most people are quite honest about it. Well, maybe, at least I am. Because I have a very simple living, and it's just no all the way down.
Oh well, it's not hard to be honest if you're checking no.
Yeah, I know. But and also I think value on a property in Sweden is where it's situated too, of course.
Yeah.
It's housing in Stockholm is much more expensive than housing in Norrköping.
But this form you get, does it come from the municipality or the county or?
The tax,
IRS.
Comes from the the government of Sweden.
Yeah.
So if Sweden does the assessing as a nation, then
well, we are the size of one of your states in America. So.
The best way to check assessing is that it should predict the sale that occurs after the assessment.
Mm-hmm.
So this is in the United States, they say an excellent assessment is within 10%, that half the properties sell within 10% of what the assessment was.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that's excellent is the property owner himself could be off by 10%. People from out of town almost always pay too much. And when there's an estate sale, somebody dies and the heirs are selling the property, they almost always sell for too little. So that 10% ends up being not necessarily the assessor's error, it could be the property owner's error or the buyer's error or the seller's error. So 10% is very good. And there are states that get 10%. I think Pennsylvania is one of the worst, and I think we get about